You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a Feisty Menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Live Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. First, I would like to say it was so wonderful to meet so many of you during the Outspoken Summit in Arizona. What an incredible weekend filled with incredible speakers, workshops, and networking. For those of you who missed it, definitely check it out next year, put it on your calendar. It is an amazing resource for women looking to build businesses in the endurance sport space. And just thanks to everyone who came up and introduced yourselves, and good luck with all your endeavors. I would also like to wish my listeners in the US a very happy Thanksgiving tomorrow. I have so very much to be thankful for right now, and not the least of which is every single one of you listening to this show. I love creating this podcast, and it brings me incredible joy to see it growing and being shared and received the way it has been. So thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful time with your loved ones. And if you're not in the US, I wish you well also. Okay, because we're coming into the holiday, one more note. As US residents know, it's Black Friday this Friday, which is really just our national shopping day as we get ready for the holidays. And what I'm going to say here applies to everyone, no matter where you are and whether or not you celebrate Thanksgiving in the US. In the spirit of Black Friday, when all the major retailers are running sales, we are offering a few of our own. And again, this applies to everyone everywhere. So listen up. On Friday, you can save 25% on tickets to our Hit Play Not Pause Summit. So you get $5 off the ticket and get your entry for $15. Remember, you can watch it virtually or on demand. So get your ticket this Friday. It's coming up very quickly. We are also offering free massages. Well, not us personally, but anyone who purchases an entry ticket to our Feisty Menopause Performance Retreat this week will get a free massage at Lake Nona Performance Center that you can redeem at the event. If you haven't checked out the retreat yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It's filling up, and it's going to be an amazing, fun, educational weekend in sunny Florida in February. Come on down and join us. Finally, do you love off-road cycling adventures? If you do, join me and the Gone Graveling Festival May 11th through the 13th in 2023 in Bentonville, Arkansas. And this week only, you get a free t-shirt or tank top with your registration. All of these sales end at midnight Pacific time on Friday, November 25th. So come on down and check them out. All right, on to the guest. This week, I had an absolute pleasure of sitting down and talking with Zora Benhamou. Zora is a self-described biohacker who has her own podcast called Hack My Age for Women Over 50 and a website by the same name, hackmyage.com. She is also a certified breathwork instructor and sport nutrition coach, as well as the author of the Longevity Master Plan and the Eating for Longevity cookbook. Zora lives her life as a digital nomad, traveling the world, and she has traveled to over 50 countries so far, lived in 8, and she speaks 6 languages. As if that weren't enough, Zora is also a gerontologist, and she is deeply immersed in the literature and the scientific study of aging and its effects on well-being and the medical treatments you receive, as well as being on a mission to just disrupt ageist stereotypes in the media and broadly. And I just freaking loved this conversation. Menopause and midlife are inextricably intertwined. How we experience one impacts how we experience the other in many ways. And I've been wanting to dive in and pull on so many of these threads for a while now. And Zora was just the perfect person to have this conversation with. We talk about all the challenges we face during this time of life and the steps we can take to make our journey through both menopause and midlife better. And we also talk about what's good about this time of life. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. She cites a bunch of studies, like a bunch of studies and resources. I'll just add that. So I am going to be sure to drop all of those references, and she provided them all into the show notes for you. All right. As always, I invite you to follow us at Feisty Menopause at Instagram and Facebook. Sign up for my weekly blog at feistymenopause.com and continue sharing the show with your friends and on your socials. It is helping us to grow and get great guests like Zora, so I appreciate that. Before we get to it, a very quick thanks to Bonafide for their continued sponsorship. I heard from a woman who can't take hormone therapy because she's on hormone blockers for breast cancer treatment, and she was having hot flashes around the clock, literally almost every half hour at night, which were making her miserable. She started taking their product Relazin, which is a non-hormonal treatment for vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes and night sweats. And she said she noticed improvements after about a month, and 9 months later, she is hot flash and night sweat free. So thank you, Bonafide, for your support and your help. Okay, truly, enough of me. Let's have a few words about those awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right, Zora, it is your turn to be on my show. I am really, really excited to have you here today. So thank you for joining us. This is, I love what you do as a gerontologist, right? I love what you do in that space. And I think there's a really important conversation to be had that I have not yet had about the intersection point of menopause and midlife. And I thought you were the perfect person for it. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I just love the fact that I can bring my community to the Feisty Menopause community, to your podcast. I talk about it all the time. And really, we need to have these two groups converge and empower more women with what we know.
Yeah, 100% agree. So let's go right into it. I mean, I'm curious from your point of view, what are some of the keystones of aging well, in your space that impact how we experience the menopause transition?
So aside, we've always talk about diet and exercise and sleep and all this stuff. And of course that has an impact. But I think a lot of people forget about their attitudes. There's their happiness factor, the relationships. This is something that we study a lot in gerontology, and it's not talked about enough. So when it comes to attitude, we'll talk a little bit more about attitudes in menopause across the globe. But the attitude is kind of like, well, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, right? And this is largely influenced by some sociocultural aspects, but you're having a positive attitude in general in life is going to help you live a better life. Now, will it make you live longer? Possibly. I mean, we know that certainly the journey will be much more enjoyable. So we want to think about our happiness. What will make you happy? Knowing yourself is super important too. And luckily around this period, we really, kids are gone, they're out in college and the empty nester. Now we have our time to look into ourselves. We can start to dig deeper. What do we really want in life now in this new phase? What will make you happy? What is your purpose in life? I mean, this is something in Japan called ikigai, and I'm sure you spoke about this before. And that literally means the reason to wake up in the morning. What's gonna charge you? What's gonna give you more energy? So, what makes us most happy and what will help us live better longer. And I want to share a study with you. And I think I sent you the link, and I think absolutely you should share this with everyone because it's a very interesting study by Harvard. It's the study of adult development. It's one of the longest longitudinal studies that started in 1938. And it's now continued as the sort of Harvard second generation study. It originally was men, and these were Harvard students. Yeah. So these white men from Harvard, including John F. Kennedy, They expanded later on to poorer populations in Boston, and then finally they started looking at the wives and the female children of these people. So they do have some flaws in this study. It started with all white males, and it's still largely white population. There's not enough diversity, and it's all in the U.S. But what was interesting about this study, they really delved in deep, and they were doing MRIs, they did blood work, they measured your blood pressure, heart rate. Eventually, they started looking at genes. They had detailed questionnaires every single year. They were going back to these people. And what they've concluded was that more than diet and exercise, genes, and anything else, that strong, positive relationships keep us healthier and happier. So these are connections to our family or friends or community. This is super, super important for the life experience, but also the menopause experience when you think about it. And what they also came was very interesting what they said in this study, that close relationships more than money or fame, which is no surprise, are what kept people happy throughout their lives. We kind of know that now, but still when you're young, you really search for that, right? And that's a little bit surprising for me as a gerontologist, because we always learn that when you have more money or you have more education, you have better jobs, you're able to get better medical care, you're able to buy better food, you have more health literate. But it's those ties that those connections that protect people from sort of life's discontents, and it helps to delay mental and physical decline. And these are better protectors of long and happy lives more than social class, IQ, or even genes. That's a pretty big punch. And
I fully believe that though.
don't you?
I I didn't mean to. I thought you did. You have
Yeah,
one more
yeah.
point there to make
I
before
do
I?
have one more
Okay,
point, but
make
I
one your
really,
point because I have a bunch
I,
of things to say. So go ahead.
I'm taking a breather. Yeah. But one other thing that they mentioned in this study that I'll read it out the way they said it, because it's so super important for this audience of women going through menopause, is that there were several studies that found that people's level of satisfaction with their relationships at age 50 was a better predictor of physical health than their cholesterol levels were. So if you're most happy, those people who are most happy in their relationships at 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And that's another, pretty, think about your relationships right now. Are you happy with them? And if you're not, change them so that we can live a longer, better life. And it doesn't mean that, those people who are in, marriages and couples that they're everything's perfect. But it does mean, those people also have some conflict. It's just at the end of the day, they know that someone's got their back. And so, and if you're in a bad marriage, without much affection or love, then this turns out to be really bad for your health, and worse than getting divorced. So divorce is a big one on the stress scale, and impacts our health. But really what the studies are showing is it's probably better to get a divorce than actually sit in a bad marriage. If that makes
I
sense.
love so much about everything you just said. And I like that you talked about like happiness is not necessarily dancing, waking up and dancing and swinging from the chandeliers, having sex, and like like all that, like happiness. I mean, that's great, but happiness, because it's funny. Like I consider myself a happy person, but I'm also like I have a lot of existential dread. I mean, I have anxiety and existential. I've got all these things that you would consider like hallmarks of like not being happy, but I am content and I have purpose in my life and my relationships are good and all that stuff keeps me what I consider very happy, like just very grounded, no matter what else is going on in my life. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you heard of, you are the average of the five closest friends that you have?
Oh, that's interesting.
So
No.
think about, yeah, if your friends, the five closest friends you have, if they're generally negative and smokers or drinkers, or you'll probably wind up to be very much like them. But if they're if you're generally have positive friends who support you or are nice or are successful or whatever it is, then you'll be the average of those people. And that's something to really consider when you're going through menopause, or you're aging and you want to age better. Look at the people around you. Those are super, super important. And because they can either add a lot of stress to your life, circulating more cortisol and stress hormones and affecting us, not only mentally but also physically. Or do you want to change that? And we can change that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some studies that are super interesting in terms of those relationships and how they impact menopause. But one other thing I wanted to share with you as well that I thought was really cool from this study is that 80-year-old men and women who were happily partnered, they said that on the days when they had the most physical pain, their mood remained just as happy. Meanwhile, those in unhappy relationships had their physical pain get worse, just being magnified just by being in more emotional pain. So when you think about when we go through menopause, it's not always hunky dory, right? We sometimes have some pain, joint pain, or we have the hot flashes and things like that. So consider again your relationships in terms of are they supportive or not to help you on that journey, because the research is showing, yeah, pain may be more magnified if you're not in a healthy, happy relationship.
Pain science validates that. Like there's I mean, we could do 7 shows on pain science, right? It's fascinating. But it verifies everything that you just said about the magnification of pain. And what you're saying is also echoing some research from Mary Jane Minkin, who was like the 3rd guest I ever had on this show, and she did research on, and you might touch on this later, on in cultures in which aging is not denigrated, but rather looked at as a positive thing. Women's menopausal experiences are far better. I mean, that's not to say that they don't have the same vasomotor symptoms or whatever, but like your brain turns up or down the volume on all of that, depending on right, the culture you're in and how it's affecting you. So that's like this whole attitude piece is super important. And it's not just like, oh, pull yourself up by your panties and have a good attitude. It's what you're talking about. Like if you are surrounded by people who are dragging you down, and if you are, it. Like one of the things you can do, I'm not saying like dump all your friends and start anew, but maybe just find another community. Like if you like to walk, run, ride, whatever you like to do, find a community that does that and become part of
Mhm.
them. And then you could make some better relationships that will take you in a more positive direction, right?
Yeah, you absolutely hit the nail on the head on that one. And in gerontology, we learned that there's a theory called the socio-emotional selectivity theory, and this is shows that as we age, we have a more awareness of death coming on, and we know that our time is more limited. And so we start to be very selective with our relationships. We
Mm.
start to invest more time in those quality relationships we already have, whether it's your family or your friends, as opposed to when you're young, you're just going out and trying to make as many contacts as you can and trying to, climb the corporate ladder or try to, have more friends. And it doesn't really matter. You just get them all. We really take a different look. So the good thing about aging is that we become much more selective and we can really nurture our network, and hopefully, again, to say this again, I'll say it a million times, is make sure that you choose people who are supportive of you and who make you happy.
Is there and I don't know if there's an answer to this, I don't know if there's a genetic stream that runs through this. I mean, my father is a diehard glass half empty pessimistic human being, and I am the polar opposite. And he was always like, Celine, you could walk over a cesspool and not see the shit. And maybe that's true, but like like that's I but I am relentlessly positive. um so I wonder if there is a genetic component, to any of this. And if there is, I mean, perhaps if you are a Ron Yeager, that's my dad, pursuing people who are a little on the sunnier side might help. I'm not.
Yes, yes, we have in psychology, the psychology of aging. We have this thing called the ocean, OCEAN, and if I can hopefully remember all of them, O is for optimistic, C is for conscientious, E is for extroversion, A is for I can't remember. It'll come to me, and N is for A is for it just came to me, to get lost, and N is for neuroticism. So there were four positive or what we would consider positive traits and one negative, but they found out that those who are just more open to experience, more optimistic, that those people tend to have healthier lives and better attitudes towards aging. And so the more neuroticism you had, then of course there was the opposite effect. And I can't even remember, I'll have to remember, pull the study out, but it was something, and they looked at high school students even, and they could sort of predict based on their character how long they would, not exactly how long they would live, but if they would be more vulnerable to
Right.
diseases of aging. And so yes, your personality definitely affects your aging process. But I've met, people in their 90s who are grumpy old men, and they're
That's
like,
true.
and they're negative, and like, how do they live so long? There's always like,
Stubbornness.
yeah.
My father's doctors have said as much. They're a testament to stubbornness. How that my father's still like up in his wood shop doing his thing, despite many things.
Exactly. So there's always, yeah, there is personality is important, but what we found, and again, there's a little debate on this. There's some new research coming out, but what we learned is that as there's sort of this U curve of happiness. Have you heard of
Mm,
that? Where
yes.
we're happiest in our childhood and up to our
Mhm.
20s, and then the most depressed around our 40s, and then happy again, as we reach our 70s. But there is debate with that. But if you want to look at that, well, then yeah, great. We tend to trend to be happier as we get older,
Right.
and that's even if you sort of born with a negative personality. So that there is some hope. So you can choose to look at that study or not. But I think it's always good to have a look at the glass half full and rather than half empty. It just makes the journey much more more enjoyable.
No doubt. But he's 84. Maybe by the time he's 104, like the glass will be a little more full. Anyway, before we move on to before we move off this a little bit, I wanted to also, I wrote down while you were talking blue zones, because I have so many women DM me, or they'll message and be like, hey, the people in the blue zones eat this, or you hear all that and you read that and I'm like, yeah, but I've always thought the relationship piece is really the big thing with the, like, community, with when and I'm talking about the blue zones as a place where people are the longest lived. And there was a whole book on it and probably a website and everything, and everyone's like, it must be the resveratrol or the tofu or the, you know what I mean? Like but they all have like strong communities, and that seems to be
Yeah.
the underlying thing there.
Yeah, no, definitely. The blue zones are those pockets of populations where they have high concentrations of centenarians. So people kind of go out there and try to look at what they're doing and how they're behaving and what they're eating. And, to me, I always question that because I wonder, I'm not going to necessarily replicate what they're doing now at age 100. I want to know, what did they do when they were 50? Like,
Mm,
so, and I'm sure they're not behaving or acting or eating the same things as they were when they're 50. And maybe they were. I mean, I'm just question it. So, and that's what I would like to know because I'm 52. So I would love to know. But definitely in all across, so in the blue zones, they kind of find out what do people have in common. And we always think it's what we eat. And yes, we have a big impact on what we eat, but we have to also remember we all have different microbiomes, different genetics, and different, it's just tastes and what we like to choose to eat and what we don't. But I think it's the easy piece that people think that, we want to change. Let's just start eating that, and I'll live to 100. But But again, you kind of question, do you want to live to 100? Do you have enough money to live to 100? Will people still be alive when you're 100? Will, society support you? I mean, think about what life may be at 100, and I'm assuming you hope that you'll be in a good condition, right? Be 100 and falling apart and be suffering for the last 30, 40 years. So that's something. The blue zones are interesting, but there's so many factors too. But I do agree that the relationship factor, knowing you have a social support system, because think about when you're 70, 80, I mean, we can't imagine yourself at 80 years old. What will that be like? And we don't really know. I have no idea what I'll be at 80. I'd like to imagine how I will be. But when you are, say, imagine you don't have any family around and you have no one knocking on your door saying hello, or how are you doing? Or do you feel okay? Maybe you're not able to go and get food or cook. Who knows what you'll be like? But when you know that someone's there and checking in on you, as they got your back, it lowers the stress a lot, because it is stressful if you're not prepared, or if you don't have this social network as you're older. It's stressful to lose your eyesight. It's stressful to lose your hearing. It's stressful to to lose a lot of your senses and not be as capable of doing things as when you were younger. And it doesn't mean that I don't want anyone to look at this as extremes. I won't be able to walk or hear or see. But we sometimes dramatize it, right? I mean, the first time I started losing my eyesight on my one eyeball, I was like, oof, that's not doesn't feel good. What's going to happen? And when will I go blind? But that's it's not always like that. And there's so many other things that we can do to support the aging process. But relationships, your family, your friends, super, super vital to that process. And you don't just wait until you're 80 to start making relationships. You start when you're young. It takes years, decades to make strong relationships, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And a lot of the podcasts are talking now about that reverse engineering process, sort of like looking exactly what you're saying, like what do you want to still be able to do when you're 80? That means you need to put in place a plan now. And I think that I talk a whole lot about making muscle, but I think I'm going to talk about making relationships just as much now.
Exactly.
It's really
Yes, your
important.
relationships. I love Peter Attia's
I
Centenarian Olympics.
Yep.
Have you heard of
Yeah.
that?
Yes. I was thinking of him because he talks an awful lot about that whole process of looking forward and then working backward,
Yeah.
which
Just do
I
that process with your friends that you love that are supporting you.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's well, so let's talk a little bit about the flip side of this, because I think it's important. I hear from a lot of women, and I sort of went through a pocket of that myself where I felt really pretty alone, going through when I sort of entered the menopause transition tunnel, whatever you want to call it. And it's disconcerting, to feel isolated or to feel alone, which is different from feeling lonely, because I do have friends. Can we talk a little bit about like that part of this piece?
Yes, I felt like you when I just started to have some joint pain, or I got injured, and it's possibly due to the change in hormones. And so many people told me, you know what, maybe you should slow down. And I was
Mhm.
like 48 or 46 or something, and I was like, wait a second. So I was, when you hear that, and again, think about those people that surround you. The more you hear that, the more you start to believe it. And I was feeling really alone, like I'm just some anomaly. Nobody likes to be active like I do. And I'm not running marathons or anything. I just like to move my body. And then I found you and your group, and I was blown away. I was like, this is where I need to be. This is my tribe. And I need to bring more people here, because your message to me that I got, the one thing that stood out was menopause is not a time to slow down. It's a time to speed up. And that just made my day, made me so happy. And then finding all the stories that the women share with you, and I thought, this is where I need to be. So the feeling alone is yeah, something that happens to so many women when we go through this menopausal transition. And I think there are many people out there, and many cultures still around, that don't talk about it. It's
Yeah.
still taboo.
Yeah.
It's it's got a stigma. I even had one client of mine who in her 60s from Ireland, and I started to mention hormones and menopause and things. And she said, I'm so happy I can talk to you about this, because when I talk to my friends, they say, shh, 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 we don't talk about that. I was like, wow,
It is a thing.
this
Yeah.
is just last year. And I'm like, wow, this is, I got to change the circle of friends a little bit. And so, but she was relieved because she didn't feel alone anymore. And loneliness is something that can actually kill us. I did a podcast that with Kathleen Toomey, and she and I discussed loneliness, and it's just as powerful and has a powerful impact on your body physiologically as smoking or alcoholism. So
Wow.
lonely, yeah, we covered this a lot in gerontology. I mean, it was unbelievable. So we don't think about it until we're in our 70s or 80s and maybe alone or lonely. But loneliness can happen at any age. And it's different than social isolation, which,
Hmm.
during the pandemic, a lot of people felt socially isolated. So loneliness is that feeling of that distressed feeling that you're alone. And it's very subjective. And there's this imbalance between
You
your
can be
desire.
surrounded by people and be
Yeah,
lonely. Yeah.
exactly. And so the social isolation is just, okay, you have no people. So we got to make sure that it's that feeling of being alone. Despite having many people around, that's like, it's actually, loneliness is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I don't know if you heard of that before. There's a study that came out that was kind of made headlines, and everybody loved to use that headline. It just shows you the impact that loneliness has. And the reason is that it's a stress. It's a stress on the
Mm.
body when you feel alone, and having that biological impact. And in fact, it can build up the plaque in the arteries. And this was something that I thought was fascinating when we took a course in my gerontology program called the Mind Body Connection. And this is a research based university. I went to USC, and I saw that on the curriculum, and I was like, okay, this is not just woo woo stuff. And so we talked about that. And I remember asking my professor, I said, look, if somebody has a perfect diet and they're exercising and all that, but they're stressed, will they still have the plaque buildup in their arteries? He said, yes. So that's cortisol and all of the stress hormones, epinephrine or epinephrine, all this adrenaline running through your body, which is fine. Like, we need that at certain times of our life, but we don't want this chronic, cortisol running through our body. So it can, increase cancer cell growth, spreading, the cells everywhere. It promotes inflammation. And there's just so much stuff that any kind of disease, you can probably link it somehow to cortisol, or any of these stressful hormones. And so it's that low grade chronic inflammation that we're worried about, and this oxidation in the body that's leading to these diseases, and not to mention this disruption of our natural hormonal balance. So, when you think about going through menopause, if you're feeling alone, get social, go out and seek a support group, go to the Feisty Menopause Facebook group, Instagram, local community groups. If you want to see people one-on-one or find your friends going through this too, this is so vital. Again, bringing you back to relationships, because it is dangerous. And it's to have that it's okay to feel lonely once in a while or alone, but if it's sort of this chronic and you just fall into this depression, you are setting yourself up to be more at risk of disease. So better to start now and get on the Facebook group with Celine and me.
Yeah. It light bulbs are going off all over as you're talking, because as we were talking about before I hit record, I just came back from the North American Menopause Society annual meeting, and there was a whole keynote session on biosocial stress, psychosocial stress, and its unique damage on women. Like, young women through midlife, we are uniquely susceptible to it and have all like ischemia and all these plaque, all this stuff you're talking about that puts us at risk for coronary heart disease is associated with this stress that we are uniquely vulnerable to, and that cortisol piece is a big part of it. And like, as we know, when estrogen declines, like, that becomes harder to manage. So this is super, super important. Like, and dovetails right back to the relationship stuff that you're talking about, because that can help lower the stress when it's good. And I just wrote down, and nobody take this because I'm gonna put it on a shirt: lift, love, laugh. Like, instead of, I think I think that's our key here
Yes,
as we
absolutely.
go through this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I need one of those t-shirts for sure, because that is something that, people so don't take seriously sometimes, and how important it is. So we
It's
need to do
really
all
important.
three
I
of
mean,
those.
it was very, very striking. I mean, it seeing, because they had like, the pictures of inside of arteries and all the, all the stats, like women are really, really susceptible to it. And
Mhm,
we forget, even though we keep getting told that heart disease is still our number one killer, or, everyone has breast cancer on the brain. And I understand
mhm.
that, and there are pink ribbons everywhere, but like heart disease kills us by far more, by far.
Yeah, it is by far, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, because we often think about the breast and the breast cancer and the C word, and we're so scared. But for some reason, and it's not only people who are overweight or smokers. I mean,
Totally.
you've heard and you've shared on the podcast too how many people are athletic and lean, and they have clogged arteries, they have heart disease. I mean, how in the world is this happening? But it does, and we need to be super aware of it and do something about it. And I think that's why we need to look at our life in terms of what is the root cause. Always be okay. We can take some medication if you want, or you can try to have some lifestyle changes. But definitely in your lifestyle change, find your happiness factor and surround yourself with those good, positive, strong relationships. And I think that will at least contribute in a good way.
100%. I love it. So let's talk about some circumstances that women in this demographic find themselves in, and how maybe to navigate that, because so much of this is a little easier said than done. And we are in this, we're the women, especially in our listening demographic, and where they're coming from, are among the first generation of women in these numbers to be, you know, pursuing professional pursuits, climbing corporate ladders, lining up for triathlons, raising kids a bit later in life, also taking care of parents, at this part in time. I have aging parents, I have a daughter in college. You feel this stuff. Like, what does this mean for our quality of life in either direction? I mean, there are positives to all this, but there's also got to be a negative to all of this.
Yeah, there's definitely benefits and drawbacks. And so, there's that's why everyone has to find out what is right for them. But let's keep in mind, first of all, that we're speaking mostly to this modern Western developed
Yes,
world, because
100%.
in the other, other parts of the world, this is still not there, or it's just barely starting.
Yeah.
But maybe they'll get there, and there's, again, benefits and drawbacks. So I would say, if you're climbing the corporate ladder, this is one great thing. I mean, women, okay, you can make more money, you'll be more financially secure, you'll be more
Mhm.
independent, more access again to those medical resources and better quality food and better medical care. But this may be at the cost of burning the candle at both ends, or trying to keep up in a man's world. I mean, this stress from a corporate job may come at a health cost. And it's not even a corporate job. I mean, I know people who are working two jobs just to
Yeah.
make the ends meet. They're just
Yeah.
surviving, and that's just stressful. So really, it's trying to find that sweet spot in terms of, okay, let's be financially dependent, or let's do that. But we need to always consider our health, and what price we're going to pay. And when it comes to, say, doing marathons and triathlons, I mean, this is all great. I mean, this is, so, like, in terms of the physiological aspect, this is great for staying fit, and you have better cardiovascular function, better hormonal balance, lower risk of your osteoporosis, and just having more lean muscle mass. That gives you strength and power, hopefully balance, and of course falling less. And falls are a big deal when we
Yeah, they
age.
are.
It's
They're a big, big deal, and I don't think that's appreciated enough either.
no.
Really, it's a big, big deal. And when we did those balance challenges, I mean, I think some women, like, well, including myself, like it's surprising, like how, lift one leg off the ground and close your eyes and see what happens. Like working on your balance is really important. And put some earplugs in your ears and try to walk to the bathroom in the night, because I sleep with earplugs. And when you
Ah,
lose your sense of hearing, it is very surprising, like, how your balance isn't
yep,
is really
is off.
impacted. So just like,
Yeah.
I think we think even women, and I'm one of them who think I'm so fit, and I'm strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean your proprioception is great or your balance is great or all those things. And it's really important because falls are devastating.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you ever see those classes in the gym about balance and mobility,
Hmm.
those are some of the best classes you can take. And it's something we need to work on every single day because, less chance of falling, less chance of hip fractures and all these other things. But going back to being fit or taking being in a triathlon or setting these goals, it also gives you a feeling of strength and
Mm.
badassness, right? We want to it helps our self
Efficacy.
awareness, and yeah, I mean, it's really nice. But the flip side of that, the drawback maybe, well, if you're doing this too much, the chronic cardio that we learned from your podcast and Dr. Stacy Sims and many of the other guests, that like this may not be the best way to support our hormones and during the menopause transition. So we need to just modify the types of training perhaps, but it doesn't mean to slow down or not do those things. It's just, again, finding our sweet spot. And what I love about your community is we see these older women smashing their goals and breaking records and triathlons and Ironmans. And I hope we can change that word Ironman one day. I don't know why. But
It's some
it's
things are just really entrenched.
oh God, yeah, we need to come up with another word. But when we see these women in competitive sports, it's really great to combat ageism. Anybody who follows
Yes.
me know I'm just out here to disrupt these ageist stereotypes. And when
Yes.
we see someone doing it, which this is when I just like really when I saw the women who are in your community, I just have hope, I have inspiration, and this is really good for society because when we're taking care of ourselves, right? We're using fewer medical resources, right? There's more of the budget that can go to maybe to education or to something else, right? So there's always there's always benefits and drawbacks, but just in general, you having all of these things are great for our self-confidence and self-esteem, great for our mental health, and eventually it does impact our physical health and helps us live a longer and better and happier lives.
Yeah, no, and I love that piece about, the ageism and what you're doing in that space because, when I started this and it a lot has happened in 2 years, right? Like there's a lot of more people talking about menopause and it's blowing up all over the place. But, I there were some people that did not want to say the word menopause or talk about menopause. And I was even like, should I put it in the show language? Because are people gonna even like want to be on or listen? And it's because of the ageist piece. It's because
Yeah.
menopause was associated with being an old lady and nobody wants that. And like it all has to go and it has to start somewhere, right? But I
Mhm.
think that we have to keep hammering away at both of those pieces, because that's how
Yeah.
the whole wall falls down.
Exactly. No, I appreciate your support with that because, right now we don't feel it as much as somebody in their 70s or 80s who may feel invisible at this moment.
Yeah, uh-huh.
But if we're lucky, we'll all be old, right? We'll
Right,
all get there. And when you get there is not when you're going to start combating ageism, right? We need to do it now. Even if you're 20, even if you're 10, like we need to do this now in order
right.
to help yourself when you get there, right? So really, ageism is a whole other topic we can
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about later.
There are many. This could pull a whole, like, 3-hour spell, but we're not going to do that. Um, one of the upsides I have found of this, walking, especially something happened at when 50 happened, at age 50, like, I felt this, like, all of a sudden, like, I am 50 and I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't even know where it came from, but it was great. It was wonderful. And that I think is like one of the, and I hear it over and over again. And I don't know if there's a biological thing happening. Like once your ovarian hormones sort of die down and that nurturing part, you know, isn't needed anymore. You're just like, well, that's great. Whatever. I'm just doing my thing. Um, I'm wondering what your thoughts on that, and if this is something that you have experienced, or if there is a biological or social, psychological
Mm.
reasoning behind it.
Yeah, it seems a lot of people share this experience. So there is an explanation. Now, finding one is a bit hard, but when we were talking earlier, I don't know if I can say this, but we were talking about this newfound no fuckness, right, to
Oh,
their
you can say
advantage.
that. Yep, yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I went to a biohacking conference last weekend, and Vishen Lakiani of Mind Valley was speaking,
Mhm.
and he had a great word. It was called unfuckwithable. And
So
and
many
that's
things you
what it
can do
is.
with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it is, and it's this state when you're completely at peace with yourself, and
Mm,
nothing can shake you, and you don't have any fear of loss anymore. Like I don't care. And then that state, you're not afraid to dream or take some bold action or fail. You're just kind of immune to the criticism or even the praise, and you're just this inner
nice.
happiness is totally fueling you. You got the self love, and just fear no longer rules you, and that's huge. That's where we all want to be. I think it helps us navigate life much easier. And it happens, you're right, as we age. Why is this happening? So, it's could be some hormonal changes. I'm not a hormone expert, so I can't really
Mm,
talk about that.
mhm.
But is it the lack of or imbalance of hormones that makes us unfuckwithable, or is it when our hormones are in balance? I would say maybe it's maybe toward more towards when we're in balance, when you're thinking about a positive effect. But is it because we're happier when we're older? I don't know. If you look
Right.
at that U curve of happiness we're talking about, if you believe that, or is it the socio-emotional selectivity theory where we talked about having prioritizing your time towards those existing good social relationships? There is also a positivity effect as we age, and this is where they've done studies where they find that older adults have a bias towards positive stimuli.
Hmm.
So some say that this positivity effect is the result of cognitive decline, because positive stimuli is less cognitive demanding than negative. But other research has shown that other older adults with higher levels of cognitive control, they can also have the strongest preference for positive stimuli. But generally what they would do is they show you flashes on the screen of positive happy images and then negative images, and then they'd ask the participants, what did you remember? And so compared to the
Hmm.
younger people, older adults will remember the positive ones.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, and that's pretty cool. That's called the positivity effect. And older adults are just better in general to let go of negative emotional experiences. Like, we have no more time in this planet for negativity. Like,
Right.
we're gonna
Right.
die, right? So it's like so we're not we have
Right.
that, again, that timeline for us. We're closer to death than we are to birth. So younger kids and teenagers, where they're always comparing themselves to when they were born, like, so they want to be older, whereas we
Right.
know that life is short. And there's another interesting aspect, and this maybe talk about, he goes in a little bit, could be an explanation of what's happening in the brain. But there's very famous geriatric psychiatrist, and he was also the founder of the National Institute on Aging. His name's Gene Cohen,
Hmm.
and he created these 4 phases of aging. And phase 1 is this midlife reevaluation, and phase 2 is the one of liberation and innovation. And it happens generally when we're our 50s to 70s, but there's a lot of crossover overlap. It can happen at many different times. But he calls this age speaking one's mind. And it's a
Mm.
time, yeah, when we say, well, what can they do to me, right? This unfuckwitableness. Yeah, we're just like, we don't care. And we also question, if not now, then when, right?
Right.
We have, again, that
Right.
timeline. And so he says there's this inner push that's moving towards liberation and not compliance anymore. And we just, we have this more willingness to take risks, and it's a time to do those things that we always wanted to do. And that kind of makes sense when you think about, your different phase of your life. But when he speaks, he's not talking specifically to women. But it could maybe have a greater impact on women. But when he talks about the brain, he says that during this phase in our brain, there's these new neurons that are growing in the hippocampus, which is part of our brain that's involved with just processing information. And there's these dendrites that are like these
Mm.
finger like cells at the ends of the neurons that receive communication from another cell. So we want those dendrites to be long, we want them to be strong, and they're at their most dense and longest during this period, which is crazy. And
That
that's
is.
yeah, and so this is what he explains is could be giving us more, this post formal thinking and intuition, as well as better communication skills. Now, that's debatable still, but if it's true, that's the only kind of physiological explanation, other than perhaps some hormones, that I could explain for that. Because most of the research that's done on this attitude, this sort of letting go, are psychological and or sociological parts of aging that people kind of look into.
That's really, really interesting. That
Yeah.
I will put a bunch of links in the show notes to this one. Um,
Yeah.
you are, how many countries have you lived in? Over 50? Like you are a,
Over, I lived in 8, but I've
oh,
traveled
you've
to
traveled.
over 50. Yeah. So
That's
I've
a
I've
lot.
been around, but, and it's still a small number in my book. There's so many places I still want to go, and things to see, and different experiences, because I've been traveling since I was 2. Right. So it's like, I don't remember very much when I was younger.
Right.
So, and I have a different perspective on the world as well. So it's even more and more interesting.
Is there something that you can share about the impact of culture on menopause from your experience?
Yeah, yeah. There's my experience, like since I've been in this track of aging and longevity, I've been mostly looking at people who are older, sort of
Right.
post-menopausal.
Right.
But I had to dig into the research, because this was a really good question. What is happening to women and their impact on menopause? I still see, lately I've been asking women. I was in Poland, Gdańsk, just a couple of weeks ago, and I met a woman in her 50s going through menopause, and I asked her some questions, and she was quite shy and didn't want to talk too much about it. But I didn't really know her very well either. I just met her, so to be fair, but she was aware and all that. So, but when we look at the WHO will say that natural menopause happens between 45 and 50 years old worldwide. So that's pretty similar. And so there's this other paper that came out. This is kind of old, actually. This is 1996. That said, if you use 50 years old as a proxy for menopause, and about 25 million women are passing through menopause each year, that's huge, right? So there's
Yeah.
a lot of people going through menopause. Now the question is it the same or different? And now physiologically, we have similar experiences, right? Where no one's getting away without going through menopause. Like,
Right.
just now, whether experience is different, that is true. Now, there are also very big differences in attitudes between those in the East and the West part of the hemispheres, right? So, whether you're poor or rich, you're developed or underdeveloped, educated or uneducated, all of these have an impact on how you're going to go through menopause, or how these people are going. So you can look at ethnicity or geographical and social factors, but family support affects your symptoms and severity as well. So there's this that I found fascinating, was there is this socio-cultural influence, and it's your beliefs and values that can have a great impact. So in those societies, and you said this at the beginning of the podcast, that those people where age is more revered and the older woman is wiser and a better woman, then menopausal symptoms are significantly less bothersome, right? It
Right.
doesn't mean that they don't have them. They do, but they just don't impact them as well.
Yeah.
So, this is, if you in a society kind of like us in the Western society that equates menopause with old age and negativity, then the symptoms are just more devastating, right?
Yep.
And it's more
Yep.
painful. So, what I also found is that those people who lived in female dominated households also had fewer symptoms than those who lived in male dominated households. And you
That's
think about
interesting.
different cultures where there's women running the household or men running the household. That's an interesting point. And so if we want to look at Asia, for example, just Asia as a whole, because there's Japan and China, India, Malaysia, there's so many other places, but generally they had a lower rate of reported menopausal symptoms, okay, than say in the West. And the use of bioidentical hormones or hormone replacement therapy or whatever you want to call it, it's lower in
Yeah.
Asia. Yeah, for sure. And there's a 2010 study, and I can give you all these studies that I pulled out. It was super fascinating. That women across several different Asian studies, only 19% of the women took HRT to manage their menopause symptoms. and 37% used herbal or natural remedies. And in China, it's thought to be as low as 2%. So that's, not a whole lot of people using HRT in Asia. And in Japan, fewer reports of hot flashes and, again, symptoms, 25 to 50%. They even had to create a word for it in Japan recently that's just based on an English terminology of hot flash. So, they didn't even have a word until recently because they're not experiencing it as much. I mean, and they do have lower rates of heart disease and osteoporosis and all that. I don't think that there's enough research to say it's their soy in their diet, but some people hypothesize perhaps it's a phytoestrogen. It mimics estrogen, but we really can't say. But what I really loved about Japan, it's their collective cultural attitude towards menopause, and they have a word called konenki. And konenki is the word for menopause, and it also means renewal, season, energy. And it's just a natural life stage. So it's kind of, again, this is a country where, older age is more revered than in the West. So you can see that perhaps that's having an impact. Maybe it's not the soy, maybe it's their relationships, who knows. And China is similar. They, also menopause is seen as a rebirth and natural, and it's a welcome end to your menstruation cycle. They're happy to let go of that, and you can use your energy to do so many other things. Again, fewer symptoms, but it was interesting. Those who lived in cities had worse symptoms than those who were more rural. And then in this one interesting study too, they had there were more symptoms if you were more educated. Really don't know. Maybe because if you're more educated, you're living in a bigger city. Not really sure, but
stress might come into play with that whole
yeah,
that whole thing.
yes. Exactly. Maybe they don't have their relationships, as tight as when they, as people in the rural. I don't know yet, but that was super interesting. Malaysia and Sri Lanka, India, these are similar experiences, but again, it's their attitude towards menopause that is different than ours in the West. It doesn't mean, again, Sri Lanka has just same menopausal problems. India, they have, for some reason, there's some premature menopause going on there, mostly in women who are living in the rural areas, which to me I thought would be a bit different, but they're having heavy bleeding and joint aches and these perimenopausal period. But again, they do look at it as a time of liberation. It's just not as negative, and it's not that they're all happy dory.
Right.
It's just the way it is. And the last piece of research that was interesting that came out were women in the Middle East, and they had a similar frequency and severity of their hot flashes to women in the West. So again, it seems like women are passing through this. Some have more, some have less, but in in Arabic, the word menopause is called the hopeless age or the age of desperation. But this is thought to have more to do with like the end of childbearing years or something. So rather than the actual experience of menopause. But
right.
it's, again, we have to, the language is super interesting. And again, we have to put into context, we're not speaking Arabic, or we don't know.
Right.
So it's really hard. We may be very judgmental on one side and not really know what's going on the other
Right.
side.
Right.
But again, in the Middle East, it's a time of renewed life and great inclusion. And when you actually, in some of these cultures, you're not allowed to do certain activities if you're menstruating, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like, woohoo, now I can go to the party.
Yeah, for real.
So
Literally.
yeah, it's kind of like that's a positive thing. So again, what really what are taking away from this is it seems is that in these cultures where you have strong support, great family connections, you have a positive attitude towards aging or a positive attitudes toward menopause, then it's really, really helpful. And it doesn't mean you're going to get away scotch free, but you will definitely have a better experience.
That's great. And I just wanted to make a little note about soy because I think it's such an interesting conversation, because we've been having this conversation about soy for decades now in this country, right? When I believe it's in Next Level when we were working on that. There's interesting research that finds that if you want to go back to the gut microbiome, a lot of people in the West don't have the enzyme, the bacteria in their gut to process it the same way as they do,
Hmm.
in those countries where they're born and raised on soy diets. So
Yeah.
there's much more to it than, eat more edamame and I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
saying before, you can't just pull something out like that and be like, that must be the thing.
Yeah.
Sure, it's part of the thing, but as we're drawing, there's a huge complex picture.
Yeah, and ask yourself, are you Asian living in China? Where this study was made. Does that
Right.
apply to you? And certainly in Asia, they're not eating soy the same way we're eating in the West. I mean, they're very different
Not
ways to
veggie
eat it.
burgers, right?
There's no veggie burgers, no. So that's there's a lot of things yet to pull out from there. But yeah, that's I really what really stood out for me in that research was the attitudes and
Totally.
the relationships of support that you may have.
Love, love, love it. So I have loved everything about this conversation. We're coming up on an hour. We could probably talk for two more, but I would really like to just ask you if you had one piece of advice for a good journey through midlife and menopause, what would it be?
Oh gosh, it's hard
Just
hard
one
to
thing.
say
Come
just
on.
one. Well, it's I have to
That's
pull
not
out.
a hard question. I mean, come
I
on.
know it's clearly your attitude, and I love that
Right.
unfuckwithableness.
Yeah.
That's just become that, but it is that. Again, I think that we've heard it all throughout this conversation. Your attitude and your happiness factor and your relationships. This is something. Nurture your network. I mean, work on those relationships. Seek people who will support you, because when you have this positive attitude towards aging and menopause, it's so much easier, right? Why not?
Why not? 100%. Thank you so much, Zora. It has been a true pleasure, and I'm glad that you are part of our community.
Oh, thanks for having me so much. It's a true honor.
Well, that's our show. Join me next week when I sit down with ultra runner Cam Prongay. I came across Cam when a friend of mine shared a brilliant essay that she wrote for ultrarunning.com titled The Menopause 200. I was hooked after the first line, where she wrote, "To be clear, I did not sign up for the Menopause 200. My ovaries did." And it was funny and insightful, and I knew I just had to have her on the show. And she did not disappoint. Cam is a veterinarian and she's very science focused. And we just had a great conversation about her logical and emotional journey through this transition. So come on back next week. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You've been listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. The show is edited and produced by the strong, talented, and amazing women at Live Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. Share the show with your friends, and please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.